All right, everyone, welcome back to the podcast. My name's Eric Bruns, and with me is my buddy Steven. Steven, how's it going, man?
Good morning. Right, we're still morning.
Is
Yes,
it
going great.
what day is this? Is this May?
May
What
10th.
yeah,
So
oh
this
my
is
God.
actually a kind of a good day for all of us on the mortgage side. Maybe, the
E-
CPI numbers are out where they're expected to be. So
I know. Steven, did you see that? See
yeah,
what the number was?
we'll see if the mortgage rates actually do anything with it now, kind of thing. That's the big key. It
Yeah.
was expected, but if the market was expecting it, it's already reacted beforehand.
Yep. Forward-looking indicator. That's what
So
sometimes people don't necessarily realize is it's about the future, not necessarily about right now or the past. Of course, using the past and the present to try to predict the future, but yeah,
yeah,
that's why
exactly.
you see things out of whack sometimes, or why it maybe doesn't make sense at first glance.
Yes.
But hey, we're kind of digressing a little bit here. Today, I wanted to talk more about renting. Fun little topic of conversation, Stephen. I know you and I talk about with folks all the time, and there's a lot of feelings. I think a lot of strong feelings when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to if it's ever a good idea to rent a home as opposed to buy a home. So I guess, Stephen, I wanted to ask you, kind of starting off, have you ever worked with anyone or started working with somebody, helping them with their mortgage, where you kind of decided maybe it made more sense for them to rent as opposed to buy?
Yes. On the surface, it's usually better to buy than rent,
Mhm.
but every person is different. I mean, a lot of things I think comes down to me, it's not when the time to buy is, it's how long you're going to be there. How long is your time going to be in that market, quote unquote, that house to be there to get the value out of it, kind of
Mhm.
thing. Because if I'm going to be there a year, granted, the money I am paying on rent is gone. I'm not going to gain that back besides the value or the time being in the house. And then, but if I buy something, it might not appreciate enough in that year that I might actually lose more money than I would have rented for, kind of
Right.
thing. So it just depends on the person's situation. So timing is the biggest part. If all else is equal, it's how long are you going to be there?
Yeah. I know the textbook answer to that is usually like 3 to 5 years stability. You're going to be there. You're not going to move, because that's when getting through the fees and the increases in potential appreciation of price and all that starts making a little more financial sense.
Yes.
But I know we talk a lot, and I like to talk a lot about it's not just about dollars and cents with this stuff, right? A lot of times it's a values judgment, what you as a person or a family believe in and what you want to do with your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a huge impact, even if the numbers say one thing. What you want to do can be just as, if not in many ways, more important.
Yes.
So I know a example I run into sometimes, and you tell me if you see this working with folks. I notice a lot of younger folks tend to value more the flexibility and the freedom that they feel they get out of renting as opposed to buying. Have you seen any of that?
You do get that. And that's people with new careers. They don't know exactly where they're going. They're not established maybe as much as they want to be.
Mhm.
So it makes sense for them to rent. They don't even know what area. Maybe they just moved to South Florida, so they don't even know what area to go into.
Mhm.
So they don't want to just move and buy here right away because they're trying to figure out like, okay, if I buy this, yeah, the house might be great value, but like the neighborhood is crap to them, kind of thing. They
Right.
don't understand what they're looking for in that sense of things. So sometimes just coming in a new career as a younger person is you're just trying to feel out the area of where you actually want to be. And so you're going to rent, for the first year, maybe even 6 months, just to kind of figure out where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that kind of goes into one of the big issues people run into when they're buying, and where maybe they make mistakes a lot, is they're pressed for time, right?
Yes.
So they get pressured into buying something that they really didn't like, or maybe didn't appreciate the nuances of that neighborhood or that house or whatever, because they felt they needed to get 4 walls and a roof around them pretty quick.
Yeah.
And that freedom that could allow you to have a year-long lease, or maybe a little more, to take your time, figure out what you like, and then put down roots there.
And the year-long lease, you don't have to do it for the whole year. Most leases have a cancellation clause or whatever it might be. Now, of course, you got to, sometimes it's about it's common to see 2 months of rent is what's due to cancel a lease. So you have to take that into effect too. It's okay, if I finally do find that house, I got to pay 2 months rent. Like that's another ROI you need back on it, kind of thing.
Mhm.
When you're purchasing, you got to take that into account. Like, does that fee change your mind on purchasing of, do I need to stay here a little bit longer to make it worth my while, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes just eating the fee sometimes might be more financially beneficial in the long run.
Yes.
So, but you just got to run the numbers. I know. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is, and I think because when we're at meetings or we go to events and stuff, sometimes you'll see someone say some stuff that maybe makes my eye twitch a little bit.
You got a share
Yeah,
life.
yeah. You're like, no. And to me, it always gets under my skin. It's my pet peeve when someone says it always is a good time to buy.
Yeah.
You should always buy. It makes sense for everybody. My issue with that is that it's a blanket statement that does not apply to everybody. And of course, I'm always looking at it from a financial planning perspective. So, I've worked with plenty of people that it doesn't make sense to necessarily buy or own a ton of property because it just doesn't align with their values or their goals. Especially with a lot of younger folks, some of those trends nowadays where, you know what, I don't want to buy a house. I want to buy a van and I want to travel across the country and live in a different state every month for a while. I mean, that's a whole subculture nowadays, but things like that. And buying a house does sometimes put down the roots that would prevent them from doing the types of things like traveling a lot that they really enjoy and get fulfillment out of.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the type of, I know to some people that may seem like a fringe case, but there's more often something like that comes up than you would really think on average.
And
so
there's people that they just don't dive into that. They don't think about it that way because on the surface level of everything, it is smarter to buy than to rent. Mm-hmm. Surface level. Like you're going to get a return on your investment in enough time, but if you're not going to be there in enough time, then what's the point, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'll mitigate some costs. Hey, you're going to be there 2 years. You might have some losses, less losses than you would have rent, so it might still make sense. Some people look at it that way, but again, it's the blanket statement of it's better to buy than to rent. True, half truth.
Half truth. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's not somebody saying it's not wrong, but it also you have to in the equation of how long will you be there, what maintenance once you do buy the house comes up, kind of thing. What are you going to have to take care of? Because we know when you rent, something breaks, you call the landlord and say, hey, fix this. It gets fixed, kind of thing.
And some people really value that. I know it might seem strange to some folks, but yeah, it's like, I never want to deal with it. If my air conditioning breaks, I don't want to have to then figure out who do I hire. And then you got to get the permitting and make sure the permitting's done properly and then get it installed and pay for it and then do the follow-on inspection and all that stuff. If you're renting, that all just gets taken care of for you. And some people do put a premium on that. So they're willing to pay a little more monthly maybe to cover something like that if they're just paying rent, as opposed to if they were just paying the mortgage and the taxes and the insurance and the maintenance, because they just value their time and they don't want to be stressed. And there's a lot of people out there like that.
There are, you always say it's your, what is it, time on hassle kind of thing?
Return on
your hassle. Like, like that's always a good indicator to people is which side of the fence are you on? Just because you're renting now doesn't mean you never will buy, kind of thing. It depends on your lifestyle. When do you want to establish that stuff, kind of thing. So I always think that's when I'm talking to people, we always go, if they're renting now, they're like, okay, I don't want to rent anymore. Okay, why not? What's your reasoning for it? Hey, I'm more stable, or hey, I always get well, we're having another kid, we need a bigger house. Well, you can rent a bigger house. So still, that's not a pain point, kind of thing. What is your actual pain point? Or hey, I just want the luxury of the house. Who knows what it is? It doesn't have to be exact pain point, but you're trying to find the actual reason why they want to, and then you can build from there, kind of thing. Because sometimes it does make sense just to go ahead and rent. Even if it's hey, rent for something a little less than what you might buy for, save up, and you get something else you want. That's the case too. Now, home values keep increasing, so why you are waiting, it's going to get more expensive, but you're lifestyle could change in that period, that you might be making more money,
Mhm.
less, you have stuff that's paid off now, so your budget is higher, so you just never know, right at the surface level what it's going to be.
Yeah. No, that's the whole point, I think, is you need to dive a lot deeper than just, ooh, I did a pretty quick swag of numbers and it makes sense to buy versus rent. It's a much deeper conversation you need to have with yourself in order to figure out if that's what really makes sense.
Mhm.
And it takes time and effort to kind of go through that discovery process with yourself or with your mortgage lender or with your financial advisor or your CPA or whoever you kind of bounce financial stuff off of, your family. But it's time well spent, especially if you're somebody out there that is trying to figure out, do I want to keep renting or do I want to buy? It
Yes.
is definitely the types of questions you want to be asking yourself, and the level you want to be diving is much deeper than I think a lot of people realize.
Yeah, it is a lot deeper than they realize. Like it's not, best way to put it is, how we talked about it before, is it's an investment to buy. Even as your primary house, it's still an investment. It's still an asset that you're trying to purchase here. And sometimes
Right.
people, that's their largest purchase. So it is a very serious topic, and it can't just be brushed over like, oh yeah, buying is better than renting kind of thing.
Mhm.
There's a
It's
lot
a, it's
of,
a use asset. It shouldn't
exactly.
it shouldn't be something you're trying to grow. And that's sometimes a misconception I think people get pulled into, like we talked about before, where you could get a little blindsided by, oh, my primary home I bought 10, 20 years ago. I've got all this my net worth is so much money. So I'm doing really great. But if it's all in your home,
Yeah.
it's maybe the opportunity costs on the money you put into your house and locking it up in an illiquid asset like that. I mean, who knows what else you could have done with that extra money
Yeah.
sometimes. But those are just the questions to ask a lot of times. And that's what sometimes gets people to feel a little more uncomfortable with buying as opposed to renting. They just prefer to rent, and that's okay if that's the way they are, if they've done the
Yeah.
work.
Exactly. Maybe they don't want to offset the cost of maintaining a house. They don't want to deal with it, so they decide to rent. Or hey, they're only going to be here a year or so, or their job's not stable, so that's why they're renting currently.
Mhm.
Because it is, I want to say it's always not easier to rent than to buy, but you can usually rent for more than you might actually be approved for monthly wise on mortgage kind of thing. Because there's things that they're not
Right.
going to look at. They're just looking at your straight income. You have a good credit score. Yes, they're not looking at your debt to income, but they're looking, hey, you make this much money. That's 3 times as much as the rent. You're good to go. But they don't look at all your expenses that you have on it too, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. So a little less hassle for you
Yeah.
with that stuff sometimes. So, but that's just the type of stuff to look at. And I just think a lot of times that gets lost in the conversation because maybe folks are listening to people who they're either biased toward buying real estate for whatever reason, and that's okay, or they're listening to people who are saying it's always like it's only going to go up. The real estate market's only going to go up. You got to get in now. And you could make those types of arguments for a lot of different assets out there.
Yeah.
So I always just want people making decisions with all the information at their disposal that's relevant and not just getting some skewed or biased information from a narrow source. That's usually my viewpoint on stuff.
Yeah. I think that's perfect. Now, what is your thought on, you always hear the expression like, okay, when's the best time to buy is today, or the best time to buy was 10 years ago,
Right.
right? That's 2030. Yeah, still a good time to buy. 2013, best time to buy was 10 years ago. The second best time to buy is today. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So I always think you need to be a little bit careful when you are looking 10 years in the past and going, oh, if only I'd done this thing 10 years ago, I'd be so much better off, because you've got the bias of hindsight. You know what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, in another universe or another world, you could have bought and it just stayed relatively stagnant, or it had gone down in value. Like if you bought right before the financial crisis in 2008 here in like South Florida where we're at, we got hammered. The real estate market got crushed, and it took almost a decade, I think, for a lot of the prices to recover to their pre-financial crisis levels, depending on what neighborhood or what city you
Yeah.
lived in
Generally,
specifically.
yeah.
It varied. So if you knew what happened in the past, you know what's going to happen in the future. Yeah, you could make the perfect decision. But I think you always need to be a little wary about, oh, 10 years ago, I should have done this, or I should have put more money into this position here. you want to look at what's happening right now with the best information you have and make the best decision you can based off of what you know.
Yeah.
That's my viewpoint. I do think in the long run, real estate, like stocks, like investing in certain financial markets, it does, if you pull out far enough, like we've talked about before, it does tend to go up. But that's in aggregate. That's, everything on average.
Yes.
Real estate's heavily localized. So it might make sense to buy right now. And this, I'm just making an example. Here in Palm Beach County, it might make sense to buy right now. If you're living in Oklahoma, it might not make sense to buy right now. I don't know. But these type of blanket statements, when we're kind of talking in a generalized format like this, which could be heard pretty much anywhere in the country, it's like you always got to be really careful and just look at your personal situation, what you're able to stomach, and what you think will happen in the long run, have a long-term perspective, and then make your decisions based off of that.
Exactly. Your decision buying a house is 3 to 5 years. Are you going to be there 3 to 5 years? Check. Time's going to be there. Do you have a stable income right now? Check.
Big one.
Are you comfortable with the current payment at the current interest rate? That's a big thing too, because I see a lot of people, they're hoping the rates go down and the payment gets less, and therefore they'll have more money. Their monthly payment will be less, so they'll have more money. So they're hoping for that.
Right.
It's always marry the house, date the rate. Well, you're still dating that rate. You still got that time to sit there and you got to deal with it, kind of thing. So you got to be comfortable with that, with dating that rate. A lot of people, I always tell them, like, okay, if your payment's $3,000, but you really want it at 28, like, are you comfortable with the $3,000 a month? Because it might be a year, 2 years that's what you're paying. Yeah. So you have to be comfortable with that.
And what happens if, God forbid, you lose your job? Do you have assets set aside on a contingency basis? Some people call it an emergency fund or whatever, to continue paying the mortgage on that house for at least 6 months or so until you could get a job, or maybe even more, because the higher paying job you had, generally the longer it takes to find a new job, especially if you've lost your job because of an economic downturn or anything like that. So you've just got to make sure you have all your ducks in a row. That's really the case. And if you don't, if you're, like we've talked about before, if you're pouring everything you've got into making the down payment, the upkeep, or anything that goes with the house, maybe buying that house isn't a good decision right now, or maybe you're buying too much house, or your math just not adding up. So you got to make sure you're covering all the bases.
Exactly. And that's really it. It's just, and you can't blanket statement anything about buying a house. Just as we said, it goes from neighborhood to neighborhood. It can sometimes go block to block, different for each house. Same thing with each person. Everything can be different. And you have to dive into it is, what are your long-term goals in the next couple of years? That really just what decides, should you buy or should you rent, kind of thing.
Yeah.
If everything else is the same, like, yes, you can buy a house. Should you buy a house is more the question, not, I have to buy this house or I have to rent, kind of thing. It's like, if you can't afford the house, the next step in is, well, how long are you going to be there, kind of thing. So that's the overall goal with it.
Yeah. And if you've got somebody, I think, renting, don't ever let anybody tell you that renting is a stupid decision. That's my viewpoint on that. These types of decisions are very personal. What makes sense for you might not make sense for somebody else. So you always want to be, I think, a little wary if you have somebody strongly trying to convince you this is why you should always buy for these reasons. You're throwing money away by renting. You shouldn't do it. Because a lot of times people saying that probably don't know your entire story. They don't know your finances. They don't know your values necessarily. So those are just things to kind of keep in mind if you're looking to buy. Be wary of people trying to pressure you one way or the other.
And they're not being ill-hearted with it. Like they just don't know the whole picture, kind of thing. A lot of realtors will tell you, like, okay, it's better off to buy than rent. Gotcha. Yes, makes sense. But what's your individual story on it? You're not usually breaking your finances down with them when you are going to a mortgage person. You're actually breaking everything down to see what makes sense. And you also don't want to just buy a house and be like, all right, I got this house. Now I'm house broke. All I'm paying for is a house and I can't do anything else, kind of thing.
And the really good realtors I've seen and I've talked to are the ones that when they talk to somebody, they're like, oh yeah, you know what? It makes sense for you to rent. Yeah, you don't need to buy. And boy, does that really endear somebody and really build a relationship with someone if you're telling them to do something that's not in necessarily your financial best interest. You're telling them what makes sense for them because you're appreciating their personalized story and their values and their goals.
No.
And then I'm sure down the road, that person probably comes back to that realtor when they're ready to buy. It's like, hey,
Exactly.
I trust this person. They gave me non-biased, good advice. And now I want to work with them because they're a trustworthy individual.
I mean, just recently I've had a client where 3 years ago when I first started talking to them, they were kind of looking to buy. They were better off renting because one of them was actually still going to school full time and then waiting to graduate to get a higher paying job. So it's like you should rent kind of thing. Like they wanted to buy as basically an investment and say, hey, after a couple of years we can sell it and buy something else, possibly kind of thing.
Maybe be careful.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, looking back, it was 2020 when they were going to buy, rates were a little lower, and then there was a skyrocket in value. Yeah, that could have happened, but that was once in a lifetime kind of thing where we're, usually you're seeing 3 to 7% increase. Like the time they bought their house that they live in now, which is a brand new house, they don't have to worry about anything with it. They definitely could not afford it back in the day. They're getting everything they wanted before they were trying to settle on stuff. And if they bought they were looking at a condo at the time, if they were bought that little condo they were trying to do and the market just was normalized and just slowly going up, they would not be able to walk away, without taking some kind of loss, and they're just going to go ahead and take that loss and buy kind of thing because they weren't there long enough. They were there a year and a half, 2 years before they bought their house, and it would just not have made sense for them.
Yeah, you gave them the right advice at the time with the knowledge that was available and based on historical data and precedent. What you told them was the right thing to do. It kind of reminds me of something you see in my world where it hasn't happened to me personally, but I've talked with other financial planners, advisors, where they'll get a new client that comes in, and let's say they're heavily invested in the stock of one company. Let's say the company they've worked for like 20 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. So the advisor will give them the recommendation that, hey, we should sell out of a lot of this because you are way too concentrated in one company's prospects and futures. That's putting a lot of risk on the table. So we should diversify out, basically sell mostly out of that, and then a nice diversified portfolio. And then a few years down the road, let's say that single stock that they had a lot of doubles or triples or quadruples. And then I've seen stories where then the client is upset and fires that financial advisor for recommending that they get rid of that. Mm-hmm. But just like with you, at the time, the advice that person, the financial advisor was giving that person was 100% the right advice, because you don't know in the future what's going to happen.
Yeah.
A lot of times people forget that there's just as good a chance sometimes that went the opposite direction and you would have lost 50% of your net worth, or
and whatever.
They would have been furious that why didn't you make me diversify properly?
And then or they did make you diversify and it went down and you're like, oh, this is the best person in the world. Like nobody has a crystal ball. If I had a crystal ball and tell you exactly what happened, I have my own private island.
Exactly. And that's why I always kind of laugh. Someone's, oh, what's the stock market going to do? You think, man, I don't know.
Yeah. Nobody knows.
In the long run, I've got a pretty good idea, but I don't know what it's going to do tomorrow, this week, next week, this year. Like, I'll never say that I do.
Yeah.
So, but sometimes people want that, and that's not really realistic. But the important thing is giving people the right advice with the information that's available at the time.
Yes, exactly. You're trying to mitigate as many risks as possible with what you have. Okay. Yeah. Not what could be, because it could be the exact opposite kind of thing.
Which kind of ties us back into why is it ever a good idea to rent, Stephen? You think?
It can be.
Yep. I think it sure can.
It can be. Depends on the person's situation, but it definitely can be.
Yeah. Like everything. I know probably everyone's tired of me saying it. Like personal finance is personal. With stuff. So
very true.
So, man, I think I hit on everything I wanted to talk about with this. I think this is a little shorter and sweeter. Well, who knows, than some of the other episodes.
But so far.
We'll see. I know all a couple dozen people that have listened. We appreciate you. So
it'll get there. We just need people to start leaving reviews. That's it. Start leaving reviews, share it, get it out there as we slowly start building this up. So
yeah, I know I would love any sort of feedback from folks out there. If topics they would like Stephen and I to talk about, ways you think we could discuss things that would be more beneficial to help get the information across better to you guys, because we're really just here to try to help folks out. We want to try to help arm you with as much information and good knowledge as possible so you can make well-informed decisions.
Exactly. It's just the truth out there.
Right. Unfiltered.
Unfiltered.
Where's my beep sound? Do I have
Yeah.
now? I haven't put that together yet.
Shabeep.
Beep. We wish
Yeah.
you knew.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay if you don't know everything out there. That's the point of this, is to try to help people get that information. So I hope you all enjoyed listening to Stephen and I ramble on here for a few minutes. Yeah, I hope you all take care of yourself out there. We'll talk to you guys next time. Stephen, say bye to everybody.
Adios.
All right, bye everyone. Take care now.